and welcome to Why the Book Wins. My name is Laura, and today's video is part of a series I do where I compare books with their movie adaptation. And before we get into the book and movie, I want to warn you that there will be spoilers for both the book and the movie, so if you plan on reading the book or watching the movie, you should do that first and then come back and watch this video. I also want to tell you that this is available as a podcast. I will link to Spotify and Apple down below because those are the two most popular platforms, but I am on other platforms as well. So these tend to be about 30 minutes, but especially if they're longer and it works better for you to listen to it, that is available. And I also want to say that even though my podcast is called Why the Book Wins, I do love movies as well, and there are times where the movie wins when comparing book versus movie. So it is not always the book, because I do love movies, and oftentimes, before I even started this podcast, the reason I would read a book was because I liked the movie, and so I wanted to read the book for it. And so I love both, essentially, and I think I give a fair view of both book and movie, despite my name being Why the Book Wins. Anyway, thank you for clicking on this video. I hope you enjoy it. And yeah, let's get right into the book versus movie. Hello, and thank you for joining me here today at Why the Book Wins. I am here to talk about the book Their Eyes Were Watching God, which is written by Zora Neale Hurston, published in 1937. And then the movie, Their Eyes Were Watching God, was released in 2005 and directed by Darnell Martin. So to get into the summary, this takes place in Florida in the early 1900s, and we follow Janie, who is a free-spirited teenager who is made to marry an older man when she was only 16 years old, and her grandma is the one who has her marry this guy, and the grandma thinks she is helping her by setting Janie up for a better life because she is having her marry a man who has more money and property. But Janie is not in love with this man, and after a while she ends up running off with this other guy she meets named Joe, and they move to Eatonville, which is the first all-black town. Once they arrive, Joe gets the place into shape and he becomes mayor, and he just really establishes Eatonville as a legitimate town, and he even opens up the first store, and so he and Janie own and run this store. And even though things start out good with Joe, it ultimately is not a good relationship because Joe does not accept her for who she is, and he's trying to control her and make her be the type of woman and wife he thinks she should be. But time passes, she's married to him for over 20 years, and then he dies, and then once he dies, Janie is just free to be herself once again. And during this time, she's still working in the store. She meets a guy who is over 12 years her junior named Teacake, and she and Teacake fall in love, and then they leave Eatonville and go work on the muck, is what it's called, in another part of Florida. And so they're together for a few years, but eventually Teacake gets rabies and Janie has to shoot and kill him because the rabies is making him go crazy. She then returns to Eatonville, and even though she has lost Teacake, her time with him and her experiencing true love with him has just helped shape her to who she is, and he won't be forgotten. And that's basically how it ends. And so I haven't read any other books by Zora Neale Hurston, but I did want to share that she actually is from Eatonville, the town that Janie and Joe go to, the first all-black town. And she also had a romance with a grad student when she was in her late 30s and he was in his 20s. And so that's kind of the inspiration for Teacake. And to talk about the book, I enjoyed reading it from a historical standpoint because it was published in the 30s. And so it seems, like it's a good representation of what those times were like. So I did enjoy it for that aspect. And it is a well-written story about a woman who is learning to accept herself and figure out who she is and to love herself and to find people who love her for who she is. But I will say, the way the dialogue is written was just really distracting, I thought, and I had a hard time getting in the groove of the dialogue until I was almost halfway through the book, maybe a little less. But it took me a while to really adjust to the way the dialogue is written because it's written the way they talk with this very thick Southern accent. And so for me, that was just a huge deterrent. And I actually had read this in high school, but honestly, the only thing I remembered from it was that the dialogue was hard to read back then, and reading it today, it was still hard to read for me. I will say I did go back and forth between reading this and listening to the audiobook. And so the audiobook does help a bit more because you're not having to try to figure out what is being said. Instead, you're just hearing it. So if this is one you want to read, I would recommend the audiobook personally. And by the way, if you want to get this on Audible, I have an Audible link for those who want to sign up, who have never signed up before. So if you're watching this on YouTube, I will link my Audible link down below. If you're listening to this as a podcast, I will also link it, but it is audibletrial.com/whythebookwins. And you get your first book for free. And it also helps me out as well. It helps, any money I make from this through YouTube or through Audible. It's money that goes back into the channel. But anyway, moving on. Before we get into the changes, I also wanted to mention with the movie, this was produced by Oprah. And I just think Oprah has done such amazing things and in the world of movies and her book club and stuff. But it's just so incredible how it is thanks to her that so many movies written by Black people have been turned into movies. Sorry, did I say movies early? So many books. And then by turning it into movies, it just so many more people are hearing these stories and hearing these experiences. And then more people become interested in the book as well. And so I mean, a book being adapted is just the best publicity you could possibly get. So not only is it cool to see the story brought to life, but it just brings more awareness to the book and the author, and it helps them. And so I just think it's awesome. She has, she acted in some of them. I covered Beloved, which she was in, and she also produced. And then The Color Purple, which I haven't seen or read, but obviously I know about it and I've heard great things. But also in movies where she's not in it though, like she's not in Their Eyes Were Watching God, but she did help produce it. And so I just think it's so awesome that she's used her money and her influence to do so many great things. And having these movies adapted into films is awesome. So I love that she has done so much to help bring these books to life and bring more attention to these stories. On to the differences. So to start with Janie and Logan. So Logan is the first man that she marries. So in the book, we learn that Janie's mom had been like kind of wild, I think. And so, she's not raised by her mom. She's raised by her grandma. And so when her grandma sees Janie kissing boys, the grandma gets worried and she's like, whoa, like I don't want the same thing to happen to my granddaughter that happened to my daughter. So she's like, now that she's maturing, I gotta hurry and get her married and get her in a secure life. And the grandma thinks that just the epitome of life is to be able to just, sit in a high chair is what they say, and just not have to work. However, that is not the life that Janie is interested in. She wants to have a life where she has someone she loves and that loves her. And so a guy who has property and money isn't something that she even wants. But she's married to Logan for over a year, and after a year, she's like, man, I still don't love him. And she also has to do a lot of hard work on the farm as well. So she's married to Logan for over a year, but she doesn't love him and she's not happy. And then she meets this guy named Joe who tells her he's going to Eatonville, and he just kind of sweeps her off her feet in a way. And so she tells Logan about it one night. She's like, what if I just left you? And he says something about it. But then the next day, he kind of has a breakdown about how hurt he was that Janie is thinking about just leaving him. And then soon after she does just leave him and she goes off with Joe. And I felt bad for Logan in the book, in that scene in particular where he's just like, what? Like, you're just gonna leave me? Like, don't you care about like what I feel? But if she stayed in the marriage being so unhappy, she's doing a disservice to Logan. But I still felt bad for him. In the movie, he doesn't have that, where he kind of breaks down and is sad and upset. And so you aren't as sympathetic for him in the movie. And then to move on to Janie and Joe. So they go to Eatonville, and like I said, he's very well respected and he becomes the mayor, and he like really shapes this town into what it is. And to start, things are going well. However, very soon he just gets very controlling, and like Janie's signature look is having this long hair that she has like hanging down. And very soon Joe tells her that she needs to tie it up because he sees another man picks up some of her hair and is like, touching it. And Janie doesn't even notice, but Joe notices and he gets very jealous and he tells her to tie up her hair. And this seems symbolic of him like tying up Janie's free spirit, because there's also another part in both book and movie where she's out on the porch outside of the store and she's just enjoying being around the townspeople, and they're just talking and having fun and playing checkers, and she's loving it. But then Joe tells her like, hey, like get inside, stop hanging out with them. And so then she just lives a very detached life from everybody else and is just stuck working in the store, and that's her life, is just the same thing every day, working in this store. Whereas in the movie she works in the store, but it seems like her job is to mainly go back and forth making breakfast, lunch, and dinner for Joe and bringing it to the store for him, because that's shown like as a passage of time, is her just taking the meals out to him. So that wasn't a thing in the book. She just worked in the store all the time. And in the movie, we have a scene in the beginning when he's like having a ceremony for the town, and Joe makes his speech, and then someone in the crowd is like, hey, we want to hear from Mrs. Mayor. And Janie is just like so excited and flattered. However, Joe quickly shuts it down and he's like, hey, I didn't marry Janie so she could, give speeches. I married her for her looks. Or he says something like that. So Janie is very upset and embarrassed. That was a great scene in the movie, but I actually don't remember if that happened in the book. I don't recall that happening. But as time goes on, like I said, Joe gets they both get older, 20 years pass. But Joe gets sick and he ends up dying, but before he dies, he's on his deathbed and Janie goes to see him. And I thought she was gonna say something more sentimental, but she ends up being like, hey, like, you never even got to know me. Like you didn't really love me. You just tried to turn me into someone I wasn't, and you never even knew who I was, and just kind of stuff like that. And then he dies. And before moving along to, the events after Joe's death, I did want to talk about the mule, which when I read this in high school, the main things I remembered now, like 14 years after I originally read it, I mainly remembered that the language was hard to read, that there was a character named Teacake, which is obviously a unique name, so I remembered it. And the only scene in particular I remembered was the scene with the mule. I don't know why this stood out so much when I read the book. Maybe because, you can tell it's symbolic, right? But I guess maybe as a high schooler, I didn't quite understand the symbolism of it. And so it stuck with me more because I didn't understand it. But anyway, so in the book, Joe buys the mule that belongs to this other guy. And this mule is just like skinny and everybody makes fun of it. And Joe decides to buy it. And the mule kind of becomes like the town mascot. And the reason Joe even buys it is because they're all complaining, talking, making fun of the mule basically. And he overhears Janie how she feels bad for the mule. And so then he rescues it by buying it. And Janie is like very touched and she's like, wow, like that's so kind of you, Joe. However, eventually the mule dies and then they have a funeral for it, but then they just drag it into the woods where the vultures eat it. And so there's two quotes I wanted to share that I thought really explain the meaning of the mule in a more eloquent way than I can. And it reads, "The image of the mule first appears when Nanny tells Janie that black women are the mules of the earth, meaning that they are the lowest creatures used by others. It then appears again when Logan Killicks goes to buy a mule for Janie to use when working behind a plow. His forceful attempt to make Janie work makes her feel as though she herself is being treated as an animal. Finally, the mule reappears once again when the townspeople of Eatonville make fun of Matt Bonner's sad-looking mule, which Janie pities. When Jody," which they call Joe Jody, so they use both names. "When Joe purchases the mule to appease Janie's sense of pity for it, the town regards Jody as a savior and adopts the freed mule as a kind of emblem. Throughout the novel, the mule symbolizes victimization, a theme which appears throughout the novel in various ways. The mule's funeral represents Joe Stark's need for attention and praise and refers to a woman's subordinated position. When he bought the skinny, abused mule from Matt, he did not give Janie credit for suggesting he do so. After the poor animal died, by staging a funeral, Joe sought the townspeople praise for his generosity. The buzzard's attack shows the real status of the mule and, by extension, social attitudes towards women." And to move on to Janie and Teacake. So a line, I think this was in the book, but a line that for sure was in the movie is how Janie says that every day Teacake gave me the whole world. All Janie ever wanted was to be free to be herself. And so when she finds a man who accepts her and loves her as she is, like to her, that was the whole world. That was all she ever wanted. And I just thought that was just so beautiful. And I actually saw that on a YouTube comment where someone was talking about that line and just the beauty of that, where every day Teacake gave me the whole world. And to her, all the whole world was someone who loved her for who she is. And I just thought that was so beautiful. And that's all any of us want, right? Not only from our romantic relationships, but from all relationships we have. And I mean, you shouldn't rely on other people's acceptance to allow yourself to accept yourself. Like, you should love and accept yourself, even if other people don't. Like, you don't need permission to love yourself. But there is something about, the confidence that you're given when someone loves you for who you are and accepts you for who you are. So yeah, anyway, that whole theme I really liked. And also I do want to say in the movie, when she meets Teacake in the store, because everybody's gone at the game, like the book and movie, very similar in that scene. And I thought Halle Berry, who plays Janie, and Michael Ealy, who plays Teacake, I thought they had good chemistry in that scene and just the playfulness of Janie, and I thought it was very well done. Having said that, I will say that in the movie, Teacake was a bit more one-dimensional. We have the scene from the book where he steals her money. It's a little different though. So in the movie, he's gone all day and he comes back and he had stolen her money and he went to go gamble with it to make more money. However, he ends up getting beat up and then he loses the money. Whereas in the book, so he steals her money, he comes back and he tells her that he had been hosting a party and he needed money to pay the ugly woman not to come in. And then he takes the money they still have left and he goes and gambles with it and he's gone all night long. And when he comes back, he says how, he was up, but then he was about to leave and then they beat him up and took the money. So it's kind of similar, like he was gambling and got beat up, but the movie leaves out the fact that the previous night he had been out because he was using the money at a party and he was paying ugly people not to come in. So the movie keeps that part, which helps, flesh him out a bit more. But in the book, we also have another part where when they're working out, on the muck, he is flirting with another woman who is working there, and Janie gets jealous and she like confronts them kind of. And then also another thing in the book is that Teacake hits Janie, and it's like just an accepted thing, and it's not written as if it was a bad thing. It was just something that happened. So Teacake definitely isn't like the perfect man in the book by any means. So, which makes him more well-rounded and fleshed out, right? But it's interesting too, because the movie, Teacake doesn't hit her, and he's not flirting with other women, and he doesn't host that party. They have Joe hit Janie, and that's a scene in the movie where, he hits her, and it's a big moment where it's like, wow, like he's a bad person. Whereas in the book, he would embarrass her and degrade her in public with his words, but I don't remember him ever hitting her. So it's just interesting that the movie shows Joe hitting Janie, and it's like a big moment. Whereas in the book, Teacake hits Janie, and it's not really a big moment. It's just like, again, this was written in the 30s, so I guess maybe it was just more accepted and just something men do to assert their dominance over their wives. Yeah, pretty crazy. And honestly, it's upsetting too that has ever been something that was just accepted, that men felt like it showed their manliness or showed their control when they did it. Like, it's honestly disgusting. And from a historical standpoint, I guess it's interesting to know. But anyway, so that happened in the book, and it wasn't in the movie. But I did like in the book, because this is all being told when Janie comes back to Eatonville and she's telling Phoebe about her experiences with Teacake when they left Eatonville. And I liked how at the end of the book, when she is telling Phoebe about this romance and love she had with Teacake, Phoebe is then inspired to, strike up the romance with her own marriage and to be more appreciative of her own husband. And so just the way true love can inspire other people in their love. I really love that, and it was in both book and movie. And then in book and movie, there is the hurricane that happens, and while they're trying to get away from the hurricane is when they come across a rabid dog that is trying to attack Janie, and Teacake hits the dog and he gets rid of it, but then he is bit by the dog, and we later find out that the dog had rabies. And so he gets the bite because he was protecting Janie, and then he goes crazy because that's what rabies does, and he tries to kill Janie. He tries to shoot her. And so she, in self-defense has to shoot Teacake. And I thought this was really interesting because this book is obviously full of symbolism, so everything has a meaning. So I was wondering, why did Janie have to kill Teacake? Like, if Teacake were to die, if Zora Neale Hurston was like, okay, I'm gonna have this happen, but Teacake is gonna have to die, like, why did she choose that kind of a death, right? Where Janie has to kill him. I was reading around, but I guess the overall idea is that Janie, she had the self-confidence in herself enough and the self-love that she, it didn't require her to have him in her life in order to be that strong, confident woman. And so she is able to kill him in order to protect herself and to save herself. And so then that kind of made me wonder if Teacake is meant as more symbolically, rather than just this, seeing him just as this man she fell in love with, but more as everything, seeing him as more of what he symbolizes rather than just him as a man, if that makes sense. But like we said, he is someone that helps her to appreciate herself all the more. Just some of my thoughts on that, and how I thought it was interesting that Janie has to kill him, and how she protects herself and saves herself and does what she has to do to protect herself. But anyway, I also wanted to talk about the meaning of the title. So in the movie, when Janie will be in water floating on her back and she's looking up and people are like, oh, what are you doing, Janie? And she says that she's watching God. And this happens a couple times, and it happens in moments when Janie is just free to be herself and embracing her life and is just being open. Whereas in the book, that is not the case. In the book, it happens when the hurricane is happening. And so as this hurricane is going on, it talks about how everybody is just in their homes looking up. And the passage reads, "They sat in company with the others in their shanties, their eyes training against the crude walls and their souls asking if he meant to measure their puny might against his. They seemed to be staring at the dark, but their eyes were watching God." And so this signifies how we look to God to determine our fate. We have control in our lives, but there's a lot we don't have control, and God just decides what's going to happen. And so with this hurricane, obviously, the people have no control, and so their eyes are watching God to be like, what's going to happen. So a little different in both book and movie. To wrap this up with book versus movie, I know this one was kind of shorter, but the book and movie are very similar. The movie doesn't have the mule symbolism, and then, like I said, stuff with Teacake was a little different. But the overall story is very close, very similar. And I thought the acting in the movie was excellent. I love Halle Berry. So she was fantastic. And it's funny because when I was watching this, Janie, you know, in the second half of the movie, Janie is supposed to be 40 years old. And I was like, oh, like, you know, they got someone too young to play Janie because she's supposed to be 40. And clearly Halle Berry is younger than 40. But then I looked it up and she was 40 when she was in this movie. So she just aged really well. So she looks like she's 30 when she's actually 40 here. But anyway, Halle Berry is incredible. Such a great performance. And Michael Ealy, like I said, he plays Teacake. And I thought the two of them had that great, believable chemistry. And honestly, I was more drawn into Janie in the movie than I was in the book because, I mean, like I said, the dialogue, it did take away from the story for me. And I had a hard time getting in it because I was busy trying to like decipher what people were saying. Whereas in the movie, I could just sit and enjoy the movie and I was drawn into the performances. So I mean, the book does have some beautiful prose when it's not in dialogue. And I know the dialogue is supposed to, you know, put you in that time period. But yeah, honestly, I'm going to say I like the movie better, which I know a lot of people won't like that because the book is loved by so many people. And I get it. But I felt more connected and more interested and more invested in Janie in the movie than I did in the book. And Halle Berry gives a great performance, so that is a big reason. Yeah, I did like the book. I like that this is one that is read in high schools, but I'm gonna say that the movie wins on this one. So if you've read the book, whether it was for high school or something, I would definitely recommend the movie as well. But anyhow, that wraps it up for Their Eyes Were Watching God. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I know this was one of my shorter ones, and this book does have so much symbolism and metaphors, and I just only touched on a few. So I would love to hear your thoughts down below in the comments. And like I said, I know so many people love the book because of the prose and because of the symbolism. So comment down below some of your favorite things about this book. And yeah, thanks for watching. Don't forget to give this a thumbs up and join me next week when I will be talking about Room, the book by Emma Donoghue, which was adapted into a movie in 2015 with Brie Larson and Jacob Tremblay. So I will see you then. Thank you so much for stopping by, and I'll see you next time. Bye.